A state can now signal resolve, coerce arrival, or degrade an adversary's military capability without firing a physical weapon. It can act in ways that are deniable, reversible, and calibrated to a degree conventional weapons never allowed. It can go past the physical world. It is the cyberspace. Cybersecurity and diplomacy used to run in separate lanes. That separation no longer holds. And the people who genuinely understand both worlds remain rare. You are watching InfoSec Leadership, the interview series from InfoSec Relations. Hi, I am Shant Ebenezer Jena, your volunteer host for today's conversation. My guest today has spent his career at exactly that intersection. Mr. Armand Cucciniello III is the Director of Strategic Communications and AI at Blue Force Communications. He served as a US diplomat to the Middle East, a region where cyber operations and active conflict have run side by side for over a decade. As a senior official at the US Department of Defense, he supported cybersecurity, enterprise technology, cloud, and digital modernization work for the Joint Staff and the Defense Information System Agency. He is a graduate of the National War College. Today, we examine how states use cyber operations as instruments of power. We ground that conversation in one of the most discussed and least understood cases, that is, Iran. So, welcome everyone. Now, I would like Mr. Armand to introduce himself, and yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here, and quite frankly honored that you're having me on the show. This is exciting. This is a topic that I enjoy speaking about, given my background. I'm doing some different work these days in the private sector. However, I really appreciate you mentioning my background in diplomacy as a senior Defense Department official in work in the Middle East, and also with IT, AI, and cybersecurity. Because that really is, this is one of those topics where everything I've really done in my career kind of comes together. My background is really at the intersections of communications, technology, and national security. And these days, I'm focused fully on the private sector, but there are really a lot of lessons here now, especially with Iran, that really fuse the two, because some things that may seem like they're geopolitical and political in nature or diplomatic in nature only do actually have business risks. And hopefully that's something that I can add value to the conversation for private sector entities and companies to understand. The geopolitics is not really exclusive to business. It's not these days, and especially in the cyber area. For me, the real value of understanding Iran's cyber playbook, if you will, it's not academic. I mean, it's that the threat model directly determines what a CIO or a CISO these days should be prioritizing, whether, from patching VPN appliances to screening ransomware payments against, the U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control sanctions lists. And that's really the translation work that I've been focusing on lately, is really turning some geopolitical intelligence, if you will, into operational guidance in the private sector for businesses to stay ahead of the game and not fall victim to what Iran and other cyber actors are doing. So I like to tell people, what I care about most isn't really the history lesson, although it's fascinating of what's been going on in the cyber realm with Iran and other countries. But what's what I like to call the news you can use, if you will, in the private and commercial sector.
Okay, thank you, Arman. So let's start the discussion. I would like to ask you a question. So you have moved between the Department of Defense and diplomatic world, and you've seen how differently those communities define cyber operations. From that vantage point, how do you distinguish defensive operations, and defend forward concept? And also, do you think that defend forward is a defensive posture, or it's just a mask for another offensive one?
Yeah, that's really an interesting point, because in the U.S. Government's architecture, if you will, cyber operations really are seen more of the domain on the military side. not on the diplomatic side. That's not to say that the State Department doesn't have cyber apparatus. It does, but really the Department of Defense, now the Department of War, I should say, really kind of owns that portfolio alongside the Department of Homeland Security's CISO. Now, in terms of how do we classify cyber operations, you said it yourself. There's offensive and there's defensive, right? I mean, offensive operations are actions that are really intended to project power. Normally that's done through force, but now it's also done through cyberspace. And the intent is, to degrade, disrupt, deny, deceive, a lot of D's in there, adversary information systems and networks and their capabilities. To do that, interestingly, for the U.S. to do that, it typically requires explicit presidential authorization under national security presidential memoranda in the chain of command. So offensive cyber operations for the U.S.'s purpose are military operations. On the defensive side, those are really more passive and as well active measures, but taken to preserve the ability to use cyberspace and cyberspace capabilities and protect data, networks, and systems, and just the overall infrastructure. So, really, the defense is, if you think about it in this framework, defense operations are like the shield, and offense are the sword. Now you got right at the heart of kind of something that is a little of a bit of a gray area, the whole defend forward concept. Since I think it was 2018, and it was codified more recently in 2023 in the Department of Defense's cyber strategy. The U.S. has pursued what's considered a policy of what they call defending forward, where we actively disrupt malicious cyber activity at the source before it reaches U.S. systems or networks. So, some might argue, and not inaccurately, that these really are offensive attacks, if you will, or offensive activities. But because they're conducted in a manner to get at the problem before the problem becomes a problem, if that makes sense, in a lot of ways they are also defensive. So some people call this, offensive defense. But it is legally distinct from an outright offensive cyber attack.
Okay. So it's something like an offense is the best defense.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Thank you. Moving forward. So from where you sat, how does an attack actually earn a label, like it's an Iranian attack or Russian or Chinese? Like, who makes that call? What evidence does it rest on? And what makes it so politically difficult to get it right?
Yeah, this is one of these areas of warfare, if we would call it that, because again, in the U.S. framework, cyber attacks are seen as warfare. The attribution process is actually quite complicated. Unlike, if there's a submarine that shoots a torpedo at a U.S. ship, it's pretty, quick to be able to identify, relatively speaking, and a lot less complicated on a technical level, of where that emanated from and who was behind it. Simply because, hard artillery, munitions, ships, torpedoes, submarines are not something that exists in the commercial marketplace. But because cyber and IT and computers do, there's a lot more complexity to attribution. So, attributing a cyber attack to a nation state, it's really one of the most technically and politically complex challenges, I would say, in national security, because it involves multiple layers of analysis, and it's never done by one single entity or actor, you could say, alone. So the way to think about it is that there's really two tracks of attribution, right? There's technical attribution, and then there's political attribution. The first track is really conducted by cybersecurity firms that are in the private sector. Microsoft is a great example. Google now they bought over Mandiant, and now Google also. CrowdStrike, Palo Alto Networks, Trellix. I mean, those are just some examples, as well as government agencies like the National Security Agency, CISA, the FBI. And the technical attribution involves malware analysis, reverse engineering, command and control, infrastructure analysis, IP addresses and domain registration patterns, and then also language artifacts that are embedded in code. And we'll get to that later on if you'd like, because that's something quite interesting. But then there's the political attribution, right, which is a government decision about whether to publicly attribute an attack to a specific country, to a specific nation state. And this really does involve weighing intelligence equities, diplomatic consequences, and then different legal thresholds, and also coordination with allies in order to determine whether or not we're going to attribute a particular attack to a particular country. Because the actors aren't always, the actual people doing the attack aren't always government sponsored entities directly. They may be sponsored indirectly.
So, if I may follow with attribution to the private sector, when a private company gets hit and the government holds high confidence attribution, it cannot share publicly. How would you suggest that bridge the gap between government knowledge and private sector action?
Yeah, so because to get back to that first track of attribution, I mean, the attribution, often begins with the private sector, quite honestly. Like I said, major cybersecurity companies identify and name the threat actors. Government agencies usually then corroborate these assessments using classified intelligence. So there's definitely a nexus between the two, and they have to work together. Like I said, there's a diplomatic, legal, and I was going to say foreign allies related component, but that would be diplomatic, towards the political attribution. So, a company could go out there, let's say if a company was attacked, and say, hey, we believe it was Iran, right? Or Russia or whomever. But if they don't have the US government's backing, they may not want to be so forward about their attribution unless they've actually worked behind the scenes with the appropriate authorities in the United States government in order to attribute that particular attack. It may not work in their favor, and then they're kind of just floating out there, in the public space, blaming Russia or Iran or North Korea, let's say. Does that answer the question, or did I kind of veer off topic?
No, it did answer the question. Thank you. Moving on. You've made that geography clouds this analysis, and that many operations attributed to states come from non-state actors. Yeah. Can you walk us through why that distinction matters and how it should change the way analysts read attribution claims?
I'm sorry. I got part of the question, but not fully. Can you just repeat that, the actual question part?
Yeah. Let me repeat. Just can you walk us through why that distinction matters? That's one. And how it should change the way analysts read attribution claims.
Yeah, well, so this is the issue with cyber attacks. Again, it's not like a missile being launched from a ship that has a particular country's flag, plastered on it or flying above it. Things like that. Kinetic operations are much more visible, both the impact, but also, the source and the origin. Whereas with cyber attacks, they're not. I mean, why would any country in the right mind or government want to say, hey, that was us, we attacked you. So they do these things covertly. And, this is really one of the more nuanced questions, especially in Iranian cyber analysis. And the answer, the simple answer is this: it's complicated, and it's deliberately complicated. Iran has constructed a layered cyber ecosystem that blends state actors, front companies, proxy hacktivists, as they're called, and moonlighting criminal operators to really maintain some sort of strategic deniability while still achieving its objectives. So this complicates the forensic analysis, because it really, cyber crimes and cyber attacks, it's like a crime scene. Yeah, there really has to be piecing together evidence, digital evidence, to see really who is behind this, and then with the layers of state actors and front companies conducting them, that sometimes just complicates the forensics analysis, right? Because again, it's not like firing a weapon, whether it be big or small, from a particular flagged carrier, that would make attribution much easier, much quicker.
Yeah. So the next part is mostly related to the fact that you have known the file from like Iran, so it's a Iranian case study. So the question I wanted to ask is, in your assessment, what is Iran actually trying to achieve through cyber operations? Disruption, economic positioning, access to critical infrastructure, or like something else entirely? Like, what does Iran want?
Yeah, that's really important because, again, on the surface, they look like these are just purely, geopolitical, government, state to state type activities. But they're not. And they're not purely technical activities. I mean, they really do serve a range of strategic, geopolitical, and political objectives that are deeply intertwined with the Iranian regime's broader national security strategy, you might say. So you really could think about them that there's really four intent categories or buckets. There's intelligence, where Iran is just collecting data for information purposes, right? So it uses cyber to accomplish that. Espionage, and then just information collection for context and awareness. There's also really what you might consider economic warfare and coercion, where Iran will use cyber operations in order to impose cost on its adversaries. Iran knows that the U.S. dollar is still very powerful. The U.S. is still very powerful as a country. It can't achieve strategic objectives in traditional ways that more powerful countries can, because it doesn't have those resources to do that. So it wants to impose cost on its adversaries, particularly the U.S., because it can't compete with the U.S. dollar economically. So cyber becomes a very, if you will, cost-effective way of achieving some strategic and geopolitical aims that it otherwise, won't be able to do, through kinetic force and conventional military means. Some other things, disruption and sabotage and retaliation are really another category, if you will. I'm thinking of how Iran has used cyber operations to retaliate for perceived hostile acts against it. And it's done that not just towards the U.S. or Israel, but I mean, it does it against Saudi Arabia, against the UK, Turkey, thinking some others that normally wouldn't be thought of when you think of Iranian attacks. Azerbaijan and Greece are all countries that have been victimized, if you will, by Iran's cyber attacks. A good example of this is of how Iran uses cyber in a retaliatory way is the Las Vegas Sands casino attack. I think it was over 10 years ago, 2014 or 2015. And that came after the owner of the casino at the time, the Adelsons, made public anti-Iran statements, right? So Iran, launched a cyber attack against the casino. That's a very, covert and cost-effective way for them to do that. They otherwise weren't going to be able to, hit back. I'm thinking also Saudi Aramco. There was an attack called Shamoon, which occurred by Iran, inflicted on Saudi Arabia after what was a suspected cyber attack on Iranians' oil infrastructure. And then there's one more category, which normally gets attributed to Russia, but the real influence operations and really, narrative warfare, if you will. Unlike Russia, though, Iran's primarily influence and its operation model, it's not mass social media manipulation, right? Which is kind of a signature and hallmark of Russia's troll farms. But Iran's approach is much more targeted. Iran uses hack and leak type operations. Disinformation is directed at specific audiences versus a general population or electorate. And then again, come back to hack and leak. The strategic release of stolen documents to undermine political figures. We saw that in the 2024 U.S. presidential race when Iran, or attacks that were attributed to Iran, targeted particular Trump campaign officials in order to, I think it was before the presidential debates, in order to kind of sway perception there. So again, those are really I would say the four categories, if you will, of Iran's intent. They're not always technical. They do really fit into larger geopolitical aims. However, the point of contact oftentimes happens, in, or many times, in private sector entities, which is why this is such an important topic for businesses, global businesses, not just U.S. businesses, businesses all around the world, to really understand that a cyber attack emanating from Iran is not always, there's not always a corollary. It's not a straight line between state to state, government to government. Iran will go through U.S.-based companies, U.S.-owned companies, in order to achieve its geopolitical aims.
Wow, that's actually really interesting. So, are these operations always directed from Tehran, or is there a layer of aligned but independent actors? Then, like, how does that layer change the threat picture?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because Iran is, it's infamous, right, for its proxies, right? Again, Iran doesn't have the financial and military means to exert power and influence across the globe the way that larger countries do. So it uses proxies, and it's done this for decades. With Hezbollah and Hamas, and with different operations in South America. But now it's also incorporated in that kind of framework, if you will, into its cyber ecosystem as well. To use proxies that are not necessarily directly state related or state sponsored, and they're not always necessarily in Iran, but they are sponsored, funded, and promoted by on the covert level from Tehran, for sure.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. Now, I'd like to just ask something about your time in diplomacy. Like, from your time in diplomacy, you have seen Iran use cyber activity as signaling retaliation or deterrence rather than pure disruption. So, like, what have you seen, like, in that time? Like, what goes on?
Yeah, so you have to understand that cyber activities for Iran are relatively new. If you think of, when the Islamic Republic of Iran was founded, that was 1979. The turning point, the inflection point, the wake-up call, however you want to frame it, for Iran is largely considered, at least by Western analysts, to be the Stuxnet. I always get the pronunciation of that botched up. The Stuxnet attack that happened in, I think it was 2010.
2010, Stuxnet, right? Yeah.
Yeah, Stuxnet. Yes, thank you. So that really is considered the foundational moment, right? When cyber attacks kind of became a thing for Iran. And this is when I was leaving diplomacy, so not completely, but was really more into the private sector. So I didn't see a lot of this firsthand at the time. I'm thinking of what Iran did relatively shortly after that. They tried to access control of the Bowman Avenue Dam in New York in, I think it was 2013. They didn't cause any damage. The dam had been disconnected for maintenance anyway, but the message was clear, right? They were trying to send a signal: we can reach inside your critical infrastructure. So this is an effective way to scare people, if you will, at least in the populist level, but also to signal to the U.S. government that, hey, you know what, we might be small, but in this area, we're trying to be mighty, kind of thing. Iran has pre-positioned, malware in U.S. water and energy systems. That's not an immediate attack plan, but it's a strategic signal that, hey, we in Tehran have options to exercise if we want to. So in that way, Tehran really uses cyber as deterrence, or hopefully, or is okay. That's what it's hoping to do. Rather, is to use it as deterrence. It hasn't quite worked, as we've seen since February 28th of 2026, because given the current administration's position and foreign policy towards Iran, Iran's signaling has not been as successful as maybe they hoped it would. Thank God. Yeah.
So one thing about me is I'm a very skeptical person. So in Iranian operations, which Iranian operation do you consider the most has the best evidences? Because someone a skeptic like me, I will ask for credibility or is it really done? Can you walk us through what happened, when, and how targets responded? Is there any case you remember specifically?
Yeah. So okay. So there's some against. Let's talk about infrastructure. So one against U.S. banks, right? It was called Ababel. It happened 2020. 2011 and 2013. And these were distributed denial of service type attacks on 46 U.S. financial institutions. That was traced back to a group that was previously unknown, but they claimed responsibility, outright, framing the attacks as the protest over the YouTube video, particular YouTube video that was considered offensive. So that one was that one had an attached public claim to it. And then through intelligence and other means, we were able to trace back that particular group and who was backing them. But the group made a public claim. So they kind of really exposed themselves in a lot of ways. And then I think as a result of that, I know the Department of Justice clamped down on some Iranians who were working for what were Revolutionary Guard affiliate companies. So usually the cases that have Department of Justice indictments are pretty solid, because it becomes then not just a military and a cyber warfare issue. It also then becomes a judicial and legal issue, at least for the United States anyway.
So how does the state actually respond to attacks like these?
So it could be, through a number of means, right? Using brute military force is extremely rare. It's either symmetric covert action, or it would be sanctioning. It would getting the legal, the justice system underway. And some of that might seem like it's very much superficial, right? Because if these are actors that are operating inside of Iran and they're not necessarily relying on distributed financial resources around the globe, they might feel protected and they can still kind of continue and go on doing what they're doing. But if you're slapped with United States sanctions, sooner or later, if you're doing any type of international financial transactions, it's going to hit you and it's going to catch up with you for sure. So again, state sanctions, which involve the U.S. Treasury Department. There's the legal attribution, which has to do with the FBI and the Department of Justice, and then there's the more covert piece, responding in kind. And then there's the overt military means. But even when we think about what's going on now with Iran and the Trump administration, to say that hey, we killed the supreme leader, the previous supreme leader, because of cyber attacks. I could be wrong about this, but I've never heard the Trump administration say that. That escalation of force would probably have to be something much more severe than a cyber attack at the scale that we've seen thus far.
So it's a little bit of comparison. How do Iranian cyber capabilities compare with what comes out of Russia and China? And where does that comparison mislead people?
Yeah. So the four main cyber actors, you could say, if we have to look at it through the lens of a nation state, it's China, then Russia, then Iran, and then North Korea. Those are the leading state level cyber threats, you could say, and they're not equivalent. And I'll walk through each one if that would help. So China is considered, top level. It's with the intelligence community in the U.S. calls the pacing challenge, right? You have APT groups like Vault Typhoon and Salt Typhoon that are really trying to pre-position Chinese access inside U.S. critical infrastructure at a very large scale and at a depth that really dwarfs Iranian capability. So it is important to talk about Iranian cyber attacks in the context of other state actors. Not to downplay the Iranian threat, but also just to kind of get an idea of who really has the largest stick here. China does for sure, at least right now in the current state. And China's objectives are much more long-term strategic espionage and pre-positioning for a potential much larger conflict, not near-term disruption. Russia is really the next layer down, right? And they're considered to be more experienced, a more experienced wartime operator compared to even China. So if we look at what they've done with cyber and military operations via their years of experience in cyber warfare in Ukraine, Russia's become very sophisticated. I know Ukraine is in the headlines since the spring of 2022 or late winter of 2022 because of its more kinetic invasion of Ukraine. But Russia's been conducting cyber warfare in Ukraine for years, and it's become unfortunately very good at it. But Russia is also willing and capable, if you will, of targeting U.S. critical infrastructure. And Russia, kind of, a more signature move that we've seen, most famously with the 2016 presidential election, is really, really mass disruption, right, through social media. I mean, they really do these types of things at scale to affect the populace, right, to kind of erode confidence in United States democracy and things like that. Iran is really another tier, you might say. You could say is really tier 2. If you put Russia and China in tier 1, it's considered to be much more aggressive and more significant, but it's still operating below China and Russia in terms of raw capability for reasons stated earlier, right? Iran just does not have the financial resources of these other countries. It is more willing than China to conduct, aggressive disruptive attacks, right? China rather tends to take a more cautious long-term approach versus Iran, and it's also just less technically capable than Russia, but it's definitely been more active in targeting, at least lately, U.S. political processes. And then last, just to mention it because it is one of the top 4, is North Korea. North Korea is mostly motivated by finance, right? It needs capital, it needs money. So if it can bring in money to Pyongyang, through financially motivated cyber crimes, it'll do it.
Okay, so let's shift towards the private sector, if we may.
Sure.
So for a CISO or a CIO at a company in the United States or Europe, what does this geopolitical context change about how they should read their own threat landscape?
Yeah, this is probably the most important question and the most important topic because this is where government, national security, IT, cybersecurity, media, journalism, really all comes together. When I thought about this in preparing for this discussion, I really kind of found like 7 different threads, I would say. One is that, geopolitics in a lot of ways really determines your threat level. So, your organization, your company's risk level is in a way directly correlated with your proximity to US government contracts, Israeli business ties, energy sector operations, financial services, or any industry that could be publicly perceived as being hostile to Tehran's interests. So that's really important for people to know. When we think of the most recent strikes on Iran by U.S. and Israel, I mean, any companies with ties to the Middle East, the defense sector, or the U.S. government in other ways should really assume an elevated threat level, no matter whatever their business is. If they think that they're distant, but they're somehow perceived to be connected perceived by Tehran to be connected, they may, really should assume an elevated threat level. Another thread is, Iran exploits known vulnerabilities at scale. It definitely does. I mean, the prolific mass scanners, right? There's IRGC linked groups that conducted mass scanning of Palo Alto networks and global project VPN devices. So, if you have unpatched internet-facing systems, you probably want to take care of that, because those are a primary initial access vector for Iran. Organizations that don't apply their patches promptly or disproportionately, I would say that they're at risk. So that's something for CISOs and CIOs to really pay attention. I'm thinking of some other things that Iran does. Password spraying, multi-factor authentication, push bombing, brute force. I mean, these are all things that Iran has been known to do. Another thing that companies really should be aware of is that they already may be compromised. Iran's been weaponizing pre-existing access inside U.S. critical infrastructure for a few years now, right? I mean, so this is not just a government problem. I mean, private sector organizations, really should be conducting proactive threat hunting for indicators of compromise. Audit privilege access and unusual lateral movement. Engage with sector-specific information sharing and analysis centers. I mean, these are all things that should be done under the assumption or under the concern that an organization might already be compromised. Another thing that's a little bit more particular on ransomware, because this is a big one with Iran. A significant portion of ransomware attacks against U.S. organizations recently, and when I say recently, going back 1 or 2 years, they've been traced to IRGC or Revolutionary Guard Corps linked actors. They got a Pioneer Kitten and Lemon Sandstorm or two that were linked to the IRGC. These actors broker network access to ransomware affiliates and then end up really fusing and blending state intelligence operations with financially motivated cybercrime. And this creates a critical legal risk for companies, as well as a political risk, if you will. So that's really something to be concerned about. I mean, if you're paying ransomware to a company that might appear to be independent, but because the company may unknowingly know that it violates OFAC sanctions, now they're kind of putting themselves in legal jeopardy, as well as cybersecurity jeopardy. So really screen any ransomware group against the specially designated nationals. So you get that right, especially SDN list that the U.S. Treasury Department manages before paying. And then, report ransomware incidences to FBI and CISA immediately, because then this way the government can actually help companies to advise on the sanctions risk. A few more, social engineering is really the frontline attack. Charming Kitten, right, which is sophisticated and Iranian. I mean, it's probably amongst one of the most sophisticated, if not the most sophisticated, social engineering actors in the world, I would say. So it's really important that operators build and maintain, operators inside companies, train their staff, rather, executives, government-facing personnel, especially policy researchers, anybody involved in Middle East business, on really the social engineering playbook of Iran. And they could do this through, number of different ways. Verify the identity of unexpected inbound contacts. Use enterprise password managers. Brief executives and board members on geopolitically targeted spear phishing, especially, again, around government contract work. That's really important as well. And then just two others that I have, operational technology really needs to be seen as a priority target, because Iran has explicitly targeted industrial control systems, right, that are and programmable logic controllers across a whole variety of sectors. Some of them critical infrastructure, right, like water and energy. Again, I think I mentioned earlier the Bowman Dam intrusion in 2013, and some water utility attacks more recently. And those prompted IRGC sanctions by the U.S. because that they clearly demonstrate capability from Iran and Iranian linked actors. So organizations with both IT and OT environments really want to maintain strict network segmentation, you could say, between the two of them. And then last, this one kind of wraps everything together when I thought about it and ties into the first one. Assume that geopolitical escalation is going to affect your threat level. So, if you're in a business and a sector of the economy that may not seem tied to Iran or the Middle East directly, but CNN and Fox News and all the global channels are reporting on strikes against Iran, it's safe to assume that Iran is going to try to fire back, and not just literally, but also in cyberspace. And we've seen this time and time again that Iranian cyber activity kind of surges in direct response to geopolitical escalations. And we historically, right, for the last 10 years, if not slightly longer, I mean, every significant kinetic event in the U.S., Iran, and Israel relationship has been followed by cyber activity from Iran, for sure. So again, that's very important for CISOs and CIOs to know.
So yeah, we've reached a final question. So lastly, if you could leave private sector leaders with one operating assumption about state-linked cyber operations, what would it be?
If you are in any way affiliated with the United States, and when I say affiliated, I don't just mean the U.S. government. If you're U.S. based or U.S. owned, there is a potential for your company and your operations to be attacked. I think that's the most broad bottom line takeaway. Now, I'm saying that as an American. I would also say that, for Israelis, for Brits, and anybody that's part of that, alliance, if you will, formal or informal, it's important to know that the cyber threat is real. Iran is not just looking to go tit for tat at the state level or at the kinetic level, but also, targeting U.S. companies and U.S.-based and U.S.-owned companies.
Yeah. So, Armand, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you very much, and I'm really grateful for it. So,
Thank you. I hope this was helpful. I hope it's something edifying for your audience, and that there's some news that people can use in this, particularly those that are in the IT and cybersecurity realm, CISOs and CIOs especially.
So yeah, thank you so much for showing why attribution is a political act, why intent matters more than technique, and why the private sector sits inside this competition, whether it chooses to or not to. Those are the connections in this interview series that exists to make. So We will be sending out a newsletter issue drawn from this conversation with a full narrative article on infosecrelations.com. And to our viewers, thank you very much for tuning in to InfoSec Leadership. If this conversation was useful, please subscribe to our newsletter on infosecrelations.com.